Now, most of us have had quite a lot of experience, and some of it being managed by people who at times have over or undermanaged us. And what is that like? Well, it's not very pleasant, and the sort of feedback that we get is generally not good. People do not like it. It's demotivating, it causes anger and resentment, and people tend to concentrate on the management issues rather than getting on with their work as effectively as they might. Problem is, as managers, how well do we do it? And how do we know that? Well, what I'd like to introduce today is a very simple model for having a good measure of how to do that, and an approach to management which I hope is more effective than the generally regarded way of managing, which is to come in and do what you've always done. And let's face it, that's what most of us do. There is another way. So this is the management model I'd like to show you. And what it shows on the x-axis is an individual's development in the context of work. So how well are they doing things? How well are they developed as an individual? So this might be someone who works for you, and as you go from left to right on the scale, how well do they do what they do? How well developed are they? On the vertical scale, you have their independence, and that is their independence from you. So if they're dependent, they're down at the bottom of the scale, but if they're independent from you, independently working and doing that well, then they're higher up the scale. So what we're trying to do is to get people from the bottom left up to the bottom right of the graph. So that's where they're independent from you on the vertical scale, and they're very well developed. That means, if we do that, that they don't need very much management time. And what we're trying to do is to invest our time in the people who need it. Now, ultimately, that's going to make your time more valuable, more needed for some people than it is for others, and that's exactly how it should be, but this is just a slightly different approach. So in this model, what we're trying to do is to, ideally, for most of the people, most of the time, is to make the assumption, and that's a reasoned assumption, that people are able to find their own solutions. Now, if they're just first days into the job, that is not the case. So we can reasonably assume that we can start from the bottom left and we can start telling them where to go and what to do, and give them lists of things to do, sequential tasks to get them to into their role. But for most people, we ought to be able to stretch them a bit. And the route to that from the right-hand side is to make the assumption that we could facilitate, stroke coach them, and that's achieved by asking questions. And what's the benefit of that? The benefit of that is that if we start to ask questions, particularly when we are asked a question by them, just ask another question back. Well, how would you do it if I wasn't here? How would someone else do that? You know, have you some other experience that might be relevant to the current issue that we're trying to solve? So those sort of statements to assist an individual to stand alone, to think on their feet, and to move forward in their own way. It's that independent thinking which provides not only motivation for the individual in being able to do what they want to do and are able to do, but that feeling it's their own idea. And that builds their self-confidence, provided, of course, they're successful. And then again, that's down to you to make sure that they are, you're asking questions to check not only that they are committed and motivated, but they are able to do what they do. So there may be, to check that, questions about, well, so what would be the first thing that you think you ought to do? And if you're a bit dubious about it, you might ask some questions. So what are the strengths and weaknesses of doing that one thing? This gives you the confidence you need to know that they're heading in the right direction, that they will be effective, and that they won't let you and the organisation down. So this is a very empowering technology for managing people in much more of a leadership, hands-off sort of way. Now, that's not going to work all the time, because sometimes something is urgent. And if something is urgent, and we work, for example, the NHS, if something urgent things do happen in the NHS very often, there isn't time to have a conversation or ask questions. So there may be some instructions, and afterwards they may be saying, well, you know, I'm sorry, it was a little bit short with you, but, you know, there was blood on the floor. So then, in that case, we are ignoring the model for the brief time, but then returning to the questioning facilitation methodology later in order to build the confidence and the effectiveness, that independence of the people who work for us. Now, the other time when this may not work, and this is again part of the model, is if you ask a question. So they ask you a question saying, well, you know, what should I do? And you say, well, if I wasn't here, what would you do? Or what would someone else do, etc. If their mouth sort of literally drops open, or they have no idea what you're talking about, or they don't understand, they have not enough context, not enough information, not enough training, then it may be we need to give them a little bit more information. So what we do is we come down that curve from right to left, and we might offer them some ideas, we might offer some areas if there's time for them to go and do some research, so we might make some suggestions. And we can still do that sometimes by questioning. So we could say, well, where else could we get that information from? Who else might have dealt with a situation like this? And this is similar to other situations that we've managed to solve, and how was that done? So again, we're still trying to throw the responsibility back to them so that they're self-starting, and so that they need ultimately less management time, even though for the moment they're getting more of your time in order to build them up and to develop them as individuals. So that's the model. We're treating people generally as people who know what to do, unless it's urgent, or unless they really are undertrained, under-knowledgeable, or really don't understand enough of the context that we need to provide them with more information. So that's the model, that's the approach, and it's one which is, I believe, and evidence seems to show this, that it's a highly effective way of building people up. We do have disciples of this methodology who go completely radical with it, and they start the next day after hearing about it or reading about it or being trained in it, go back and they don't ever answer a question again. There are a number of those, and sometimes it has to get toned down a little bit, because unless you're employing all your own people, not inheriting anyone, it's very often the case that some people will need your support. And the whole point of this model is that we want to get it right. We don't want to overmanage, and we don't want to undermanage. And so this model should help, particularly because it's based on questioning. So we may make the assumption about somebody, but the real way to find out whether we're right or not is to check. And we can be surprised even by some people who may have worked with us for a number of years. We put them in a box, and now may be the time to try getting them out of that box. I hope this is useful, and thank you for listening.